Welcome back, I'm Jared from DIY with Confidence. Let's get ready to fail. Whether you're an old hand at 3D printing or whether you're new to it like I am, I invite you to watch my other video where I share 27 things I wish I would have known before I began 3D printing. But today we're going to focus specifically on how to fail at printing. One of the very first ways to fail, probably the first way to fail, is to make sure that your bed is not level. Bed leveling is one of the largest frustrations and probably one of the very first reasons why people give up on printing. They can't get things to adhere to the bed properly and their prints fail because of an uneven bed. This is a gap sensing tool. This will come with a variety of different gap testers. These are all stainless steel and they come in increments of 0.02 millimeters. That's pretty fine. You can use this to probe between the nozzle and the bed to make sure that at the varying points across the entire surface of your print bed, that the distance is equidistant from nozzle to bed all the way around the entire thing. Therefore, you know that you're starting out on a flat bed. We print on what's known as a 3D print bed. And 3D print beds are a material that receives the filament to adhere to it temporarily so that we can then remove the print off of that once it's done. So there's a balance between wanting to get my 3D print to stick to the bed, but not permanently fuse to the bed. My Snapmaker 2 A350 came with this magnetic print plate. This one snaps onto the metal bed and connects and creates this clean plastic surface. I've begun recently using a glass bed. This is a great way to create a clean, finished base and also a really easy removal. Some people will use mirrors, some people will use glass. I would recommend whatever you do to use tempered glass so that you don't have shattering. And with a poor foundational adhesion, then all of the other print, the rest of the print is compromised. Some people print directly on painter's tape, so they'll lay out stripes and strips of painter's tape to cover the entire print area. I have found success in using just craft glue, school glue, the purple kind of school glue, just to put a small layer across the entire bed. Once your print is complete, it just pops off. Let's see how easily it pops off. Oh gosh, that was pretty dang easy. One of the things you need to know about using glue though is it will leave a milky finish on your very first layer. As it's released, the glue actually sticks to your print. Hairspray. Hairspray is a lacquer. Believe it or not, we spray lacquer into our hair. Well, okay, those of you who have hair,
it's really smooth.
We add a thin layer of lacquer or hairspray to the print bed, let it dry, and begin printing on top of the lacquer, and it adheres really well. The nice part about hairspray is it does not leave a milky layer on the bottom. It's just clear. It finishes like a lacquer. If you would like to have a failed print from the very foundation, use your wife's very expensive designer hairspray, and you will see failure.
What do you have to say for yourself?
Go to the store and buy yourself a really cheap bottle of hairspray. I have here in front of me several first layer failures. The benefit of paying attention to the first layer, I can stop the print and eventually save time and resources by starting over right. In many cases, all that means is manually on my 3D printer, if I have some manual print options, I can adjust up or down on prints or temperature or whatever and adjust some things manually and restart. It may mean going back to my slicing software and
here we go again,
changing some adjustments in the slicer so that it generates a G-code that produces a first print and subsequent prints that I'm going to be happy with. If your first layer is not going down as ideally as you would envision, stop. Back up, fix it, do it right. This print, it's a little stringy, but it also has almost this moire effect in it. This is really pretty and cool, but this is a bad print. I know that my print is going to fail with this one because this one is not adhering well enough to the bed. And this one has to do with the fact that there's not enough smush. Yes, that's a technical term, smush. The smush is how close or how far the print nozzle is from the bed. This one is too high. It's too high because what it's doing is laying down filament in string still. It's not close enough to the bed that by the time it hits the bed, it's almost dry. So if I see that, I know that what I need to do is adjust the print nozzle down by 0.05 or 0.1 or 0.2 or 0.3, depending on how poorly that first one goes down. Let's go to the opposite. This is one where the first layer was printing too close to the bed. So what happens in this case is that it's too smushed. It spreads out, and in some cases the nozzle is actually blocked to where it doesn't extrude any filament whatsoever, and it leaves a vacuum or a vacancy in that area because it just smeared along and couldn't lay anything down. So you can see on the front of this print, it didn't even leave any filament whatsoever. And so that's going to leave a feathery, thin, wispy kind of print on that side. When it can start extruding again, it'll leave a glob as it starts. But this is too smushed together. So I know from the get-go that this kind of print is going to fail in that the walls of this as I move up are going to be too smushed together. This will not be a pleasant print. Now here's one you might look at and say, hey, those lines are actually, those are clean, those are even, they're smushed together well. It's rough, like sandpaper on here. It's not smooth. The reason this one happened was because the temperature was too high. It just didn't give it time to cool, and so each time the nozzle went past, it remelted all of the filament next to it, and so it creates kind of a raked
bricks.
This print might complete all the way, but it's going to have a rough, porous finish on the outside and not have those clean edges and the clean finish that you're looking for. This one I began to print at a temperature that was way too low. And if I find that I'm printing and nothing's coming out, either I've got a clogged nozzle or the temperature is set way too low. And if the temperature is not warm enough, the filament simply can't extrude.
It isn't big enough. He's slowing down. He's gonna stick.
And so my nozzle will move through all the G code thinking that it's extruding, but the temperature being so low will not extrude any of the filament whatsoever. Or I might get just globs and gloops of filament as it moves along. This one was printing really well. It was a perfect print. It was doing great. But I told you my purpose today was to fail. So fail I shall. I turned up the speed.
I'm dropping the hammer.
No, you're not.
An important element of starting our very first layer is to make sure that we lay it down not too fast. When your printer begins to print the actual model, it will begin by laying down a wall layer. A wall layer is the exterior print that it lays down, maybe adding 3 to 4 passes. This creates a wall in which the interior can connect to or fill in. When it's printing well, those become almost indistinguishable when they connect. When I'm going too fast, I can see that it pulls on the wall and it leaves a gap on the exterior edge. As you begin printing your first layer, slow it down.
Whoa, slow down, little fella.
To maybe even 75% to make sure that that first layer is going down, adhering properly, laying down properly, and that you're setting a foundation for a good print all the way up. When we come to take a peek at our print as it's in the middle of printing, we will sometimes see a collection of spaghetti noodles, little vermicellis. Somehow the nozzle's begun printing in open air. It's not connecting to something. What can happen very often is I'm printing a tall, narrow print job that has a very small base on the print bed. This one did not have enough horizontal adhesion to the print surface in order to withstand the tension of a vertical growth of the print project. That one was printed with what is called a skirt. It basically just creates an outline around the print surface. It doesn't connect to the print. It doesn't support the print. It just outlines where it's going to print. That's all. Similar to a skirt, a brim draws a series of lines around the model on the base of the bed. The difference is that it will actually connect to the model so that it gives it something to adhere to and gives it some structure. It's one layer thick. It's very flimsy, but it expands footprint of the print of your print so that it has something to adhere to the bed with. In many cases, this is sufficient to hold your print in place as it grows vertically. However, in many cases, even a brim is insufficient because with a very vertical print, it still is not going to withstand, and it can actually just shear off and continue to print in the air and fail that print completely. A raft is just what it says, a raft.
Wilson, where are you?
It's crisscrossing timbers of filament. It'll create a very sturdy base. It is mounted to the actual model, but it can peel off very easily. It releases that very easily at the very end of the print. A raft is typically 4 layers high in crisscrossing patterns, but this is not as thick. There are gaps between each of those timbers so that we can easily, it's flexible and it will easily remove from the print. It doesn't become part of the print. You'll notice the crisscrossy pattern on the bottom of this. This one did a great job and allowed me to finish my print all the way to the top. But you're already noticing as I move this, that there's a lot of flexibility in this. As Z continued to move up and X and Y movement on the nozzle, it would bump these. Therefore, it laid down filament, each layer very inconsistently, and it left it
Gross.
There are a variety of supports that you can add, comparing the different options of support. The one that statistically uses the least amount of filament and has the greatest support is a zigzag support. So you may consider adding a zigzag support to your print so that it has some structure and support, and once it's done printing, it will simply peel or pop off. Needle nose pliers, forceps, maybe even a razor blade to help remove some of this carefully from your print. That zigzag support will give it some structure so that it has less flex and the arms don't move as much. My print nozzle was hitting the supports that were holding this print in place, and so it was damaging it, and it was beginning to print out of line. So I realized I could give it some support and help it stay in place and not completely fail this print by adding some Loctite Fun Tack mounting tabs. It's that blue sticky stuff that we put on walls to hang things so that it doesn't leave holes. I just squished some of this in and around the supports to give it a little bit more support on my support so that it would hold in place for the remainder of the print, and it succeeded. I apologize to you, but I failed in failing on this one. But what's up with all that cobweb? This is stringiness or hair, and this also can cause a print to fail. Even though it prints all the way to the top, it's created this stringiness and it's kind of attached. Now, it may not completely fail. I mean, you could run a heat gun over this and it will melt those right up. But it can still leave some residue on there. And potentially if I'm using a heat gun, especially on something this thin, it could actually melt my print too by the time I have it cleaned up. Stringiness or hairiness typically appears when there is still filament extruding or oozing just a little bit as it's moving from one spot to the other across the plane. And so it's just trailing that filament across. So one of the ways to fix that is to dial back the temperature just a little bit. Potentially lowering the temperature by even 5 degrees could reduce that oozing and remove the filament or the hairiness altogether. If it continues at that point, potentially you have a problem with what's called retraction. Increase the retraction, meaning how much the filament retracts in the nozzle between Z-hops. So if I can have the filament retract into the nozzle head just a little bit as it moves along, then it won't continue to ooze. Try increasing the retraction so that it retracts up into the nozzle head by even as much as 5, not 0.5, but 5 or 10 millimeters. One way to fail is to ensure that your print bed shifts. Print bed shift can happen on any of the different mediums on which you choose to print. Even when you have a great adhesion in that first layer, if something happens to knock that print bed off of axis, then all of a sudden the rest of your print will print off of axis. It will do a shift. One of the best ways to ensure that this shift does not happen is that you can use several of these office bundle paper clips to clip your bed into place, to hold it in place so it doesn't move. I have not had a single shift problem since I have put these on the print bed. I have had my print nozzle knock the print, hit my print, and knock it off. Even when I've created really great supports, a really great raft, but all of a sudden, for some reason, my print nozzle hits my print, or it moves a portion of that print so that the rest of the print fails. So to avoid this happening, what we want to do is change what's known as Z-hop. And so as it's moving from one location to another, rather than it just sliding back and forth to go, I literally want to have it go up, across, down, up, across, down. You can adjust the Z-hop to whatever height you feel you need to clear it. It will add some time to the print because it has to move up a little further and then back down. But in my mind, it's worth it because it's a tragedy to commit all that time to a print and then have it knocked off and start printing spaghetti in the air because I didn't adjust the Z-hop properly. So adjusting your Z-hop by 1 millimeter or potentially 2 or 3 millimeters will raise it up enough to clear the rest of the project and then drop down where it needs to print properly. I've seen a number of pictures and videos of people who have let their printer go unattended, extruding spaghetti for a long period of time, and the spaghetti actually gets caught up in the print nozzle, and then it wraps around the print nozzle, melts onto the print head, and seizes the entire thing and destroys it. So you want to avoid both shifting and Z-hop failure so that you're not dealing with that potential issue. I invite you to watch my other video where I've installed a Wise camera and smart plug on my printer. I can observe what it's doing.
Always watch.
And if I see a catastrophic error, I can stop it early via the smart plug so that it doesn't continue to print. I'm going to cover one more way to fail in printing. Now, all these ways of failing are not exhaustive. There are lots of other ways to fail, I'm sure. If you have any other suggestions of how to fail in printing, please comment below and share with us not only how you failed and what you did to remedy that so we can learn from your experience and help each other out in this 3D community. When I began to print with this filament, it began leaving down a globby or splattery texture all over this filament. And so I knew by the first 4 layers that this was not going to be a pretty print, even if it did print all the way. But potentially it would fail because there was some stringiness and detachedness in some of this. This occurred because my filament was moist. When there's water in filament, the water heats up, the steam releases with a pop, like moisture from a popcorn kernel. It pops out and it splatters, and so it creates not a nice thin line of filament that's just beautifully laid down, but splats and splatters. I really do appreciate you taking time to watch this video today. I hope it's been helpful to you. I'm Jared from DIY with Confidence. Please continue to watch this channel where you'll see some continued growth in 3D printing.